Few teams in German football have a history as illustrious as FC Kaiserslautern. Four-time national champions, Kaiserslautern were among the inaugural Bundesliga members back in 1963, and their players formed the backbone of West Germany's 1954 World Cup winning squad. Overall, Kaiserslautern are the 9th most successful club in the German game, ahead of Wolfsburg, Bayer Leverkusen, and any club from Berlin, the largest city in the EU, when it comes to trophies. And yet, right now, with the current football season suspended in Germany, Kaiserslautern are languishing in the third tier of German football, just 2 points above the relegation zone and a potentially fatal drop into the fourth tier. So what exactly went wrong? Kaiserslautern itself is a relatively small city, home to fewer than 100,000 people, but FC Kaiserslautern are a significant symbol within the region. That region is the Rhineland-Palatinate, located in the west of Germany, bordering 3 different countries: France, Luxembourg, and Belgium. Far from the most economically prosperous region within the Federal Republic of Germany, the Rhineland-Palatinate was established in 1946 following the Second World War and was administered by France. It formed the bulk of France's share of a divided Germany, which was the smallest of all the denominated zones, and the region had previously been under French control from 1793 until Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815, as well as for a number of years following the end of World War I. Kaiserslautern had a population of just over 60,000 when World War II came to an end, and the city became increasingly dependent on the local Ramstein Air Base, which opened in 1953. Built and operated as a United States Air Force base 70 years on, and Ramstein's importance to the region has only grown since then. America's largest overseas military base, there are more than 54,000 US citizens living in the Kaiserslautern military community in total. Kaiserslautern, the football team, were founded in June 1900 and soon went through a couple of mergers. For around half a century, the team went pretty under the radar, but by the end of World War II, they had a special player in their midst. His name was Fritz Walter, and he was unlike anything the German game had seen before, and his brother Ottmar wasn't bad either. Fritz had become a local hero during the war years which devastated Kaiserslautern, destroying roughly 85% of the city. In the regional Gauliga Südwest Main-Hessen, Fritz scored 86 goals in 44 games, which for those of you who aren't big fans of mathematics, is an average of almost exactly 2 goals a game. In their first season in a unified Oberliga Südwest, brothers Fritz and Ottmar scored a combined total of 46 goals, which was more than any other team in the league, as Kaiserslautern ran away with the Gruppe Nord. It was a sign of things to come, and after half a century in the wilderness, Kaiserslautern was seen to become one of the best known clubs in Germany, if not in Europe. Fritz Walter is a German sporting icon, and in 2004, he was voted by Germans as the country's best player of the last 50 years, ahead of Franz Beckenbauer and Gerd Müller. In Kaiserslautern, Fritz's status is elevated to that of a deity. The man they call the father of Kaiserslautern operated primarily as a withdrawn forward. Famously modest, but also remarkably talented, Fritz had a footballing IQ up there with the best of them. He aged like a fine wine, and he developed a reputation for playing his best football in the rain, something that would come in handy later on. His brother Ottmar was more of a conventional centre-forward, almost a poacher in fact. Even more prolific than Fritz, albeit not as creative, Ottmar ended his career having scored 325 goals in 295 games for Kaiserslautern. Between 1947 and 1957, Kaiserslautern won 9 out of a possible 10 Oberliga Südwest titles. Prior to the creation of the Bundesliga in 1963, West German football was divided into 5 zones, with the best placed teams from each zone qualifying for the overall Oberliga to see who would become champions of Germany at the end of each season. Through this process, Kaiserslautern were crowned as champions of Germany in both 1951 and 1953, in addition to finishing as domestic runners-up in 1948, 1954, and 1955. No team won more German titles in the 1950s, and no team reached as many finals as Kaiserslautern. When the 1954 World Cup came around, Germany were not considered the footballing powerhouses that they are now. Following a decent showing in 1934, Germany didn't win a game in the 1938 World Cup, despite forcing a number of talented Austrians to represent them. The nation was subsequently banned from most competitive sport, including the 1950 World Cup, following World War II. So 1954 was a first opportunity to garner some national pride and attention for the right reasons in West Germany. As the dominant force in German football at the time, 5 Kaiserslautern players made the West German squad for the finals in Switzerland. 2 wins against Turkey, followed by knockout stage defeats of Yugoslavia and Austria, sealed West Germany's place in the final. where they would meet by far the most formidable team in world football at the time, who had already beaten them 8-3 in the group stages. Hungary hadn't lost a game in 5 years, but with 5 Kaiserslautern players in their starting 11, West Germany overcame one of the finest squads ever assembled in the pouring rain at the Wankdorf Stadium. The game became known as the Miracle of Bern, for good reason, since it was such a surprising result and the star of the show had been Kaiserslautern's favourite son, Fritz Walter. The weather that day was so synonymous with Fritz's finest performances that the Germans called it Fritz Walter weather, and their veteran playmaker played a hand in all 3 of Germany's goals as they came back from being 2 goals down within the first 8 minutes to win 3-2. The small city of Kaiserslautern, then home to just over 60,000 people, had essentially handed Germany its greatest football, if not sporting achievement. Fritz Walter was 33 when he captained West Germany to success in Switzerland, and he played his last game for West Germany in the 1958 World Cup semi-finals, in which he was injured, aged 37. His 364th and final game for Kaiserslautern came in 1959, along with his 357th goal for the club. Kaiserslautern suffered a somewhat inevitable post-Fritz decline after that, and we ought not overlook the impact of his fellow 1954 stars Ottmar Walter, Werner Kohlmeier, Werner Liebrich, and the legendary Horst Eckel. It would be a long time before Kaiserslautern were once again competing for the German Championship, but they did win their regional championship just on the cusp of the Bundesliga's creation, thus earning them a place at the top table of German football in 1963. The next 40 years would bring some incredible highs and lows for Kaiserslautern, but they spent just 1 season outside of German football's top flight. Kaiserslautern were DFB Pokal runners-up in 1972, 1976, and in 1981. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the club began qualifying for European football on a regular basis, and supporters could have been forgiven for thinking that this was as good as it was going to get for a post-Fritz Kaiserslautern. In the 1989-90 season, Kaiserslautern won the DFB Pokal for the first time with a 3-2 win against Werder Bremen. Kaiserslautern had built a good squad, spearheaded by future German international Stefan Kuntz, but they had still finished only 2 points above the relegation playoffs in 12th place that season. In the 1990-91 season, however, there was a special coming together at the Fritz Walter Stadion, as Karl-Heinz Feldkamp guided them to their first Bundesliga title and first German championship since 1953, finishing 3 points clear of runners-up Bayern Munich. In the 1994-95 season, Kaiserslautern reached the semi-finals of the UEFA Cup, but the following season they were relegated from the Bundesliga for the first time. It was the classic case of a team that was supposed to be too big to go down. And bizarrely, the club lifted the DFB Pokal for only the second time, just 2 weeks after their relegation had been confirmed. Relegation was a bitter pill to swallow for the city of Kaiserslautern, but it proved to be a blessing in disguise. That summer, club legend Otto Rehhagel was sacked by Bayern Munich and duly appointed by his former club. What's more, the nucleus of a very good team remained intact, including star men like Pavel Kuka and Italian 90 winner Andreas Brem. Kaiserslautern won the 2 Bundesliga titles at a canter, finishing 10 points clear of second place Werder Bremen, and a winning mentality had been instilled at the Fritz Walter Stadion. In their absence, Bayern Munich had been crowned as Bundesliga champions, and the opening day of the following season would pit the champions of Germany's top and second tiers against one another. 10 minutes from time in that game, Michael Schoenberg scored the only goal of the game in what was a particularly sweet victory for manager Otto Rehhagel, whose Bayern departure hadn't been an entirely amicable one. Those who thought it was a freak opening day result would be in for a shock. Rehhagel, who later displayed his ability to extract every ounce of talent from his players by winning the European Championships with Greece in 2004, took the reins off his Kaiserslautern players. Olaf Marschall scored 21 goals playing as a number 9, meanwhile a young Michael Ballack debuted with class and showed signs of the star he would go on to become. Kaiserslautern lost only 4 games all season, once again pipping Bayern Munich to the Bundesliga title. It was a remarkable achievement by a remarkable team, almost comparable to the Premier League title won by Leicester City in 2016. Consecutive 5th place finishes followed as Kaiserslautern reached the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and the club were graced with some outstanding players in the late 1990s and early 2000s, from Yuri Djurkaev to Miroslav Klose. They couldn't curtail a drop-off during that period though, and the beginning of the end for Kaiserslautern would be the 2006 World Cup. Whilst relegation from the Bundesliga in 1996 was a blessing in disguise, being chosen as one of Germany's 12 host cities and stadiums for the FIFA World Cup a decade later seemed like a blessing, but would ultimately prove to be a curse. Opened in 1920, the Fritz Walter Stadion underwent renovations totaling €76.5 million in costs ahead of the finals. An additional 10,000 seats were added, and Kaiserslautern will be billed for the costs on an annual basis over the coming years. The costs seemed affordable for a top-flight team, but just before the finals kicked off, Kaiserslautern were relegated from the Bundesliga at the end of the 2005-06 season. The club needed promotion in order to pay off their loans, but with increased spending came increased risk, in a vicious and dangerous cycle that football clubs dance around all too often, and often with damning consequences. Unlike with their only previous relegation, Kaiserslautern didn't immediately bounce back into the Bundesliga, but they would return after 4 seasons. They looked to have turned a corner in the 2010-11 campaign, finishing 7th in the Bundesliga, but that proved to be a flash in the pan, and financial burdens were never far behind them. Kaiserslautern don't own their stadium, but instead pay rent to the city who did. This rent was reduced given the club's difficulties and their importance to the region, but the finances of the club haven't recovered since 2006. In 2012, Kaiserslautern were relegated from the Bundesliga again, and after 3 seasons of coming agonisingly close to returning to German football's top flight, a more miserable era began. Consecutive mid-table finishes were followed by relegation into the 3rd tier for the first time, something that had seemed inconceivable at one time. Kaiserslautern finished 9th in the 3 Liga in 2018-19, but as mentioned, at the time of suspension this season, they were perilously close to dropping even further down Germany's footballing pyramid. The amount Kaiserslautern owe in rent on their stadium has been reduced from €3.2 million a year to €450,000 due to the club's inability to meet payments, but still, their situation looks bleak. Kaiserslautern owe €6.7 million to their own fans, which they hope supporters will forego, accepting shares in the club instead. Even if they do, there is still talk of the Fritz Walter Stadion being knocked down and that land sold. The club still average more than 19,000 fans for home games in the 3 Liga, which is the highest average in the division, but they are no longer the top team in the region, having been overtaken by Bundesliga strugglers Mainz. Kaiserslautern have gone from Germany's Leicester to Germany's Portsmouth or Leeds, and one just hopes they don't fall a step further and become Germany's Bury or Wimbledon. That's all for today's video. Thank you for watching this video. I know a lot of you enjoy these documentary pieces, I do too. It's just tricky because they take a lot of time and don't tend to get the most views. As always, let us know if there are any other topics you'd like to see me discuss in the future, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens.